Over the course of the offseason, the Chicago Bulls have been connected and linked to guys like Jonathan Kuminga and Bennedict Mathurin. Now, those two guys have now found new homes, still leaving the Chicago Bulls 15 spot available for some said player that may be out there and may interest the guy in charge and Bryson Graham. But the question on today's episode I'm going to be asking is, did the Chicago Bulls really miss out? How am I really feeling about the decisions to go after these two guys? And is this really a pressing issue to fill the last roster spot? Y'all know we're going to talk about it, break it all down, but you got to hear the music first.
Cognac. Gang.
Shy Boys podcast with the Cognac Boys. I'm Cognac Boy Bobby, and I'm holding it down for today's daily episode. So if you're tuned in, like what you're listening to today, and you're seeing red, make sure you go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It's the easiest way possible to support us over here. And we're getting closer and closer to NBA action for our Chicago Bulls. Now, over the last 24 or so hours, we've seen two guys that were reportedly on the Chicago Bulls radar ultimately opt out of the restricted free agency with their old teams and then sign on to find themselves a new home. One of those guys was Bennedict Mathurin. He signed a deal with the New Orleans Pelicans. And then the other guy was Jonathan Kuminga, who ultimately elected to sign with the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm going to break this down, talk about both players, and then we'll continue the conversation. Now, when it came to Bennedict Mathurin, this is coming from Brett Siegel. He said sources say the Bulls were among the most aggressive of several teams interested in a Bennedict Mathurin sign and trade this offseason. But signing with the Pelicans offered him a spot where he's coveted long-term and can get to unrestricted free agency quicker. The year 2 player option also adds a layer of insurance for Mathurin. So I think that makes a lot of sense when it comes down to him having control of what his future will look like. You go out there and you play well this season. Maybe there's a market for you. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to go out there and garner more money and put more money in your pocket if you're Bennedict Mathurin. So it's not a bad idea or a bad decision, considering you literally have a quote unquote 1-year deal. Technically, you can make it a 2-year deal, but it definitely shortens that timeline of waiting if you would have been signed a deal that would have been a sign and trade that would have included a 3-year deal. So it is what it is. Now, when you talk about Jonathan Kuminga, who ultimately signed with the Minnesota Timberwolves in a move to where, hey, we'll see how it works out. I think it will work out, just me personally. And he's going to be in a situation to where those guys are definitely going to be vying for a playoff spot. And we'll see how they all mesh before we start throwing out any other assumptions. But Shams reported that Jonathan Kuminga chose the Minnesota Timberwolves over offers from the Los Angeles Lakers, our Chicago Bulls, and the Portland Trail Blazers, bypassing a similar starting role and a $12 million plus annually over 3-year contract in LA to land in Minnesota for a shorter term deal and an ability to have more control of his future, sources said, and that's according to Shams. So another situation to where a young player is pretty much trying to take advantage of his opportunities, get himself in a situation that makes most sense for him and giving himself an opportunity to recoup more money, which makes a lot of sense. And then with the Jonathan Kuminga whole ordeal, you think about it. Do you want to go and play with a guy like Luka Doncic, which is not necessarily a bad thing considering the player, but the play style will be a little bit wonky, if you ask me, for a guy that bounces the air out of the basketball. And then when you talk about the Portland Trail Blazers, a team that just went to the playoffs last year, there's kind of some up in the air things going on with ownership over there. Then you have new head coach Mike Nori. So it's kind of understandable in that regard. And you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, It was reported that Anthony Edwards was recruiting Jonathan Kuminga to join those guys over there. And I don't know how y'all feel, but if you line them up, you say you want to play with Luka or Anthony Edwards, I'm picking Anthony Edwards every single time. And the reason I'm picking Anthony Edwards, and I'm not mad that Jonathan Kuminga picked Anthony Edwards over the Los Angeles Lakers and Luka Doncic, is not only does Anthony Edwards play both sides of the basketball, he's a fucking dog. And that's not to say that Luka is not a dog, because we've seen him turn it up, you know what I'm saying, in certain situations. But at the same time, Anthony Edwards' leadership style is a little bit more vocal, and the way that he plays on the basketball court, it could be infectious in a positive way. So I'm not mad at that. And then you compare all those teams versus the Chicago Bulls. Yes, the Chicago Bulls have some intriguing pieces like Caleb Wilson, like a Montes Buzelis, like a Josh Giddey, and Norman Powell. However, we're at the beginning stages of a rebuild, and I'm pretty sure most guys, they're going to be wanting to enter a situation to where they're going to be having the opportunity to go to the playoffs. Right now, I just reported yesterday that ESPN had the Chicago Bulls ranked in the bottom 5 at 13 throughout the Eastern Conference. And not only do those analysts and those quote unquote NBA experts believe that, that could very well be the same thing for some players around the NBA if we're keeping it a buck. Because while we have conversations amongst ourselves in Bulls Nation, there's definitely a side on some people believe that the Chicago Bulls can make it into the play-in, and there are some people that believe that the Chicago Bulls don't have a shot. And now you're going to have some homers who say, hey, man, we could surprise some people, especially consider what Norman Powell said in saying that we can either be really, really good or we can be really, really bad. So those are some of the things that you strongly have to consider, especially with the newness of the Chicago Bulls team that we're going to be trying to figure out, and we're going to find out a lot about once those games being played around. But the biggest question of them all is, did the Chicago Bulls miss out? I would say you can count it as a miss, but it's something that you shouldn't be banging your head on the table about. I understand that Bennedict Mathurin could have definitely came off the bench and been a scoring option for you and helped this Chicago Bulls team. I believe that could have been one side of the discussion. But on the other side, when you talk about Bennedict Mathurin, there has to be a legit conversation on what his production would have done what for the others on this basketball team if we're having a basketball conversation, considering he averaged 17 points on 12 shots. So where does the other distribution measures come in for the others on the basketball team? But it still would have been a help, in my personal opinion. When you talk about Jonathan Kuminga, who is expected to start in Minnesota, I don't know if we would have been saying that in Chicago. He would have been coming off the bench in a lesser role, in my personal opinion. And let's keep it a buck. The biggest question mark that we have is, how good can we be? We like these pieces, but ultimately, these guys elected to move in another direction, and that is fine. At least we can go out there and say that Bryson Graham did try to add and fill that 15 spot with some guys that are on pace with the timeline that the Chicago Bulls have already. And some people may not agree with it. Some people may agree with it. It would have been up until the basketball being played for that decision to, really reveal itself. But I can't fault Bryson Graham for trying. And sometimes you're going to swing and you're going to miss. I just believe that's how it is when it comes down to GMing. You're going to have opportunities to go out there and advocate for yourself to said players. And sometimes they're not going to come. This is not the first two players that are going to refuse to come to Chicago until, come to Chicago in any situation. The way you make it more intriguing, more enticing, and make it a better situation is if the Chicago Bulls show some promise, which I believe we will do this season, because I believe it's going to be more about development and less about wins and losses, though I do have the Chicago Bulls winning at least 35 games this upcoming season. But there is a couple names that we should be watching this upcoming season, or at least right now, after Minnesota took on Jonathan Kuminga and the New Orleans Pelicans took on Bennedict Mathurin. Some names to watch in Minnesota: is Dante DiVincenzo. He is hurt, but that is a name to watch because the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to have to make some financial decisions to have some flexibility. And we should be finding out what they're going to be doing by the end of this month. Another name is Josh Green, and another name is Joan Behringer on what the decisions will look like, at least when we hone in on the Minnesota Timberwolves. And then we'll see what happens with those New Orleans Pelicans. There's a couple people that have thrown some names out there, and we'll see what happens. Maybe the Chicago Bulls could take a flyer, or maybe a guy that hasn't received much opportunity, but has been in the league just for about a year or two over there as well. But I got to ask this question as we get ready and close this episode out. How are we honestly feeling about the Chicago Bulls bench? And is scoring the biggest need off the bench for the Chicago Bulls in your evaluation? How I'm feeling about the Chicago Bulls bench, I feel okay. I'm not going to say I feel the greatest. It can very well improve. It's definitely some question marks on this bench that we're definitely going to be asking questions about. That's going to be guys like Patrick Williams. We're going to always ask questions about him. It's going to be like, how does Leonard Miller improve from last season? I believe he's going to be all right, though. We know what Trey Jones is going to look like. There's definitely going to be some questions around Dalen Swain and Noah Essengate. And then the other guy that I trust coming off the bench is Jalen Smith. But the biggest question is that enough scoring to support the starting five on this basketball team? You know what I'm saying? Is scoring still the biggest need for the Chicago Bulls? We have limited it to 3-point shooting, in past discussions, but is scoring overall off the bench still the biggest need? One could answer yes, and I wouldn't be mad. One could answer no, and I wouldn't be mad, because I think we have to sit there and wait and see. Can you have your concerns? Absolutely. But I think the games being played will reveal everything that we need to know. Now, if the Chicago Bulls would have acquired a Kuminga, with the Chicago Bulls would have gotten a player that averages 34% from the three-point line and 47% shooting from the field. If they would have garnered a Bennedict Mathurin, that would have been 42% from the field and 37% from the three shot at Indy while he was with the Pacers, but 20% shot while he was in Los Angeles. So that would have been something that we would have had to navigate through as well. The next question I have is, how much is this a pressing issue for Bryson Graham? How much is this a pressing issue for Bryson Graham? Because when you hear words and saying that Bryson Graham was one of the most aggressive in going after Bennedict Mathurin, is this something that we believe, and you hear that verbiage, is this something to believe that Bryson Graham feels like, bro, I have to absolutely fill this 15 spot with somebody to provide us with some scoring? I think that very well could be the case, because like I said, I mentioned some guys I know I can trust. But outside of those two guys that I mentioned, in Jalen Smith and Trey Jones, there's question marks. We know there's going to be some athleticism that's going to be a part of this. We know there's going to be some length that's going to be a part of this. But how do these guys genuinely help the Chicago Bulls bench? So I think it's that. I look at it like what it is. And I think that Bryson Graham, with that verbiage of the Bulls were most aggressive with this, the Bulls went after this and made this, I think that he feels that this is a pressing issue. My evaluation or my thoughts will say, damn, can we get an evaluation period? But these are not my decisions to make. It's up to Bryson Graham, who has the quote-unquote eye for talent. So I'm going to rock with him until proven otherwise. Now, I want to leave off on this note, and this is not a great way to end. I'm going to keep it right real with you right now. And this, it plays a part in why I'm like, okay, Bryson, I understood what you was trying to do. Because the free agent market, doo-doo. I'm just going to keep it a buck with y'all. I'm going to throw out some names, and y'all let me know how y'all feel. Gabe Vincent, Jet Howard, Bruce Brown, Seth Curry. Yeah. I see why Bryson Graham was in, or at least trying to acquire a Bennedict Mathurin and Jonathan Kuminga, because I'm not trying to crap on Bruce Brown and Seth Curry, but they don't necessarily fit the timeline. And yeah, yeah, it's not the best that's available out there for the Chicago Bulls. But we'll see if they go out there and try to, supplant themselves in some other type of acquisition, or if they're going to sit this one out. I'm cool with it. Do I feel like it's a miss? Yes, but it's nothing to bang my head on over. We broke it all down. Y'all go ahead and let me know how y'all feeling about everything down below, man. That is it for me today, y'all. I appreciate y'all for tuning in to another episode. Before you get up out of here, ensure that you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. We're getting closer and closer to the NBA season, so make sure you stay locked in. And hey, make sure you always see red, and y'all already know I'm going to catch y'all on the next one for sure. Peace.
Cognac. Gang.